spoils with a corps of professional government attorneys. Yes, these attorneys would be supervised by the Attorney General, and yes, the Attorney General would remain a political appointee, but at its heart, the department would rely on a foundation of professionals dedicated to the impartial administration of the law and an unbiased system of justice. Second, Congress established the Department of Justice to enforce the nation's first civil rights laws after the Civil War. From that moment on, it became the department's responsibility to ensure the right to vote and to stem the tide of systemic racism. Now, not every Attorney General in the intervening 150 years has given full expression to these two goals. I am certain that every administration has fallen short of those promises in some way over time. But today, under your leadership, sir, these two objectives are more at risk than at any time in modern history. Your tenure has been marked by a persistent war against the department's professional corps in an apparent attempt to secure favors for the president. Others have lost sight of the importance of civil rights laws. But now we see the full force of the federal government brought to bear against citizens demonstrating for the advancement of their own civil rights. There is no precedent for the Department of Justice to actively seek out conflict with American citizens under such flimsy pretext or for such petty purposes. 150 years later, we are again at a pivotal moment in our nation's history, Mr. Barr. We are confronted with a global pandemic that has killed 150,000 Americans and infected more than 16 million worldwide. We are coming to grips with a civil rights struggle long swept under the rug, if not outright ignored by our government. We are, as a nation, witnessing the federal government turn violently on its own people. And although responsibility for the government's failure to protect the health, safety, and constitutional rights of the American people belongs squarely to President Trump, he could not have done this alone. He needed help. And after he finished utterly humiliating his first Attorney General, he found you. In your time at the department, you have aided and abetted the worst failings of the president. Let us recount just some of the decisions that have left us deeply concerned about the Department of Justice. First, under your leadership, the department has endangered Americans and violated their constitutional rights by flooding federal law enforcement into the streets of American cities against the wishes of the state and local leaders of those cities to forcefully and unconstitutionally suppress dissent. Second, at your direction, department officials have downplayed the effects of systemic racism and abandoned the victims of police brutality, refused to hold abusive police departments accountable for their actions, and expressed open hostility to the Black Lives Matter movement. Third, in coordination with the White House, the department has spread disinformation about voter fraud, failed to enforce voting rights laws, and attempted to change the census rules to flaunt the plain text of the Constitution, and even defied court orders on this subject, all in the apparent attempt to assist the president's reelection. Fourth, at the president's request, the department has amplified the president's conspiracy theories and shielded him from responsibility by blatantly misrepresenting the Mueller report and failing to hold foreign actors accountable for their attacks on our elections, undermining both national security and the department's professional staff in the process. Fifth, again and again, you personally have interfered with ongoing criminal investigations to protect the president and his allies from the consequences of their actions. When career investigators and prosecutors resisted these brazen, unprecedented actions, you replaced them with less qualified staff who appear to be singularly beholden to you. The message these actions send is clear. In this Justice Department, the president's enemies will be punished and his friends will be protected, no matter the cost to liberty, no matter the cost to justice. Finally, and perhaps most perniciously, the department has placed the president's political needs over the public health by challenging stay-at-home orders in the states hit hardest by the pandemic. The department's persistent efforts to gut the Affordable Care Act will make recovery that much harder. These actions come at a price: real damage to our democratic norms, the erosion of the separation of powers, and a loss of faith in the equal administration of justice. In the hands of President Trump, a Department of Justice that adopts a dangerously expansive view of executive power and demonstrates a willingness to shield him from accountability represents a direct threat to the liberty and safety of the country. And we were warned. At your confirmation hearing, Professor Neil Kinkoff testified, and I quote, "Public confidence in the rule of law depends on there being an attorney general who will not allow the president to do whatever he wants with the Justice Department. William Barr's views of presidential power are so radically mistaken that he is simply the wrong man at the wrong time to be Attorney General of the United States." Close quote. Again, this failure of leadership comes at great cost. This administration has twisted the Department of Justice into a shadow of its former self, capable of serving most Americans only after it has first served those in power. This committee has a responsibility to protect Americans from that kind of corruption, Mr. Barr. We have a responsibility to ensure that the Justice Department and its Attorney General administer justice equally and fairly. And this is what has brought us to this hearing room today. We want to give you a chance to respond to our questions to these and other matters, and we hope and expect that you will do so in a clear and forthright manner. Our members expect sincere answers today, and our country deserves no less. I now recognize the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, for his opening statement.
Spying. That one word, that's why they're after you, Mr. Attorney General. 15 months ago, April 10th, 2019, in a Senate hearing, you said this sentence, quote, "I think spying on a political campaign is a big deal." Spying on a political campaign is a big deal. It sure is. And since that day, when you had the courage to state the truth, they attack you. They've been attacking you ever since, every day, every week, for simply stating the truth that the Obama-Biden administration spied on the Trump campaign. 1 year ago, New York Times headline said this, 1 year ago, quote, "FBI sent investigator posing as assistant to meet with Trump aide in 2016. The FBI sent a young lady who used the name Azra Turk to meet Papadopoulos in September of 2016. They sent someone pretending to be someone else to meet a person associated with the Trump campaign. You know what they call that? You know what they call that? Spying. 1 month later, October 2016, they used the dossier to spy on Carter Page. The salacious, unverified dossier, Jim Comey's words, not mine. They took it to the FISA court, didn't tell the courts that the Clintons paid for it, didn't tell the court that the guy who wrote the document, Christopher Steele, had already communicated to the Justice Department that he was, quote, desperate to stop Trump from getting elected. And guess what? There were 15 more lies that they told the court. 17 in total. They're outlined by the Inspector General, each and every one of them in his 400-page report. But guess what? Chairman Nadler refuses to allow Mr. Horowitz to come here and testify and answer our questions about the 17 lies the Obama-Biden administration told to the secret court. The Obama-Biden DOJ opened the investigation in July. They used a secret agent lady to spy on Papadopoulos in August. They lied to the FISA court in September, and they did all this without any basis for launching the investigation to begin with. How do we know that? How do we know there was no basis? They told us. Now, they didn't want to tell us, but thanks to Rick Grinnell, who released the transcripts of their testimony, we now know there was no basis for them to start the investigation in the first place. Sally Yates, Rhodes, Samantha Power, Susan Rice. Here's what Susan Rice says. I don't recall intelligence I would consider evidence of a conspiracy. How about James Clapper? I never saw any direct evidence that the Trump campaign or someone in it was conspiring with the Russians to meddle with the election. Say that again. I never saw evidence that the Trump campaign was conspiring, and yet they investigate him. There was never a proper predicate. So why'd they do it? There was no reason to do it. Why'd they do it? They told us that too. Peter Strzok, August 2016, asked, is Trump going to win? What's his response? Remember, this is Peter Strzok. This is the guy who ran the investigation. No, No, he's not. We'll stop it. August, Peter Strzok says we'll stop Trump. September, they spy on Papadopoulos. October, they use the fake dossier to lie to the court. But guess what happens in November? Guess what happens in November? November 8th, 2016, the American people get in their way. 63 million of them to be exact. Now everything changes. Now the real focus is, wow, wait a minute, we didn't stop him. He won. Now what do they have to do? They have to do the cover-up. And who do they have to go after? Who's target number one in their cover-up? The former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, the guy who's about to become National Security Advisor to the President of the United States, Michael Flynn. They can't have him hanging around because he'll figure it out. So they decide to go after Michael Flynn, 3-star general, served our country for over 3 decades. And we know they went after him because they told us that too. Bill Priestep, head of counterintelligence at the FBI, the day they interview Flynn, January 24th, 2017, his notes say what? What's our goal? To get Flynn to lie so we can prosecute him or to get him fired? Think about what the Obama, Biden, DOJ, what their administration did in the last month. The last month they were in power. January 4th, the agents investigating Flynn want to drop the case. Comey tells them no. January 5th, they have the now famous meeting in the Oval Office. Obama, Biden, Rice, Comey, all of them are in there. They're plotting their strategy, how they're going to get Flynn. January 6th, Comey goes up to Trump Tower, briefs President-elect Trump on the dossier that they already know is false, just so they can leak it to the press, and the press will write the story that they briefed the president on the dossier. And then, of course, January 24th, the day they go set up Michael Flynn in his interview. Guess what else they did? Guess what else they did between Election Day and Inauguration Day? That 2-month time, guess what else they did? 38 people, 49 times unmasked Michael Flynn's name. Comey, Clapper, Brennan, Biden, 7 people at the Treasury Department unmasked Michael Flynn's name, for goodness sake. And of course, Flynn resigns on February 13th. Flynn resigns on February 13th. Now the cover-up is complete. Flynn's gone. Everything's fine, they think, until May 9th, 2017, when President Trump fires Jim Comey. Now they got a problem again. The guy who was going to keep it all quiet, he's been fired. Now, how do they continue the cover-up? Real simple. Jim Comey leaks his memos with the express purpose of getting a special counsel appointed to investigate something they already know is not true. And that's exactly what happened. We get 2 years, 19 lawyers, 40 agents, 500 witnesses, 2,800 subpoenas, and a $30 million cost to the taxpayer, and they come back with nothing. Absolutely nothing. And so all they got left is to attack the Attorney General, who had the courage to state the truth right from the get-go. The first time he testifies after he's confirmed. And you guys attack him every day, every week, and now you filed articles of impeachment against him. It's ridiculous. He had the courage to do what no one else would do at the Justice Department. Sally Yates wouldn't call it spying. Jeff Sessions wouldn't do it. Rod Rosenstein wouldn't do it. Chris Wray sure as heck isn't going to do it. So, Mr. Attorney General, I want to thank you for having the courage to call it what it was, spying. I want to thank you for having the courage to say we're going to get the politics out of the Department of Justice that was there in the previous administration. And maybe most importantly, and we're going to talk about this in our side on questioning, I want to thank you for defending law enforcement, for pointing out what a crazy idea this defund the police policy, whatever you want to call it, is, and standing up for the rule of law. And frankly, we have a video we want to show that gets right to this point. Can we play that video, please?
Clear in how I characterize this. This is mostly a protest. It is not, generally speaking, unruly.
Peaceful protest.
Peaceful protesters.
Peaceful protest.
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 Peaceful protest. Peaceful protest.
Peaceful protests.
Peaceful protesters.
On behalf of myself, my children, and the family of David Dorn, we'd like to thank friends, neighbors, coworkers, and the community for showing all the love and support we've suffered through the tragic loss of my husband my beloved husband, David Dorn. We'd also like to thank St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department for their hard work and perseverance through this investigation, as well as Circuit Attorney's Office. He dedicated his life to the city of St. Louis, retiring at the rank of captain after 38 years of distinguishable service. Then as a chief of Moline Acres for almost 6 years. During those years, he's touched so many lives as a friend, mentor, co-worker, and guardian. His life was senselessly taken from me, from us, by an opportunist who had no regards for human life or the law. This didn't have to happen, but it must have been God's plan for David. We need to come together as a community and do better. We need to teach our young people that life is very precious. We as a family are going to be taking some time to focus our attention on healing, which is very important as we move forward. We would like David's legacy to be remembered as a loving husband, father, grandfather, brother, uncle, friend, colleague, and most importantly, a child of God. I'm going to thank you all for coming, and God bless you all.
Please don't tell me what to do.
Well, I hope that Mr. Jordan will never complain about the length of my opening statement. Without objection, I am going to insert the committee's audiovisual policy into the record of this hearing and note that the minority did not give the committee the 48-hour notice required by that policy. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. I will now introduce today's witnesses. William Barr has served as the Attorney General of the United States since February 14, 2019, having previously served in the same position from 1991 to 1993 under President George H.W. Bush. He also served as Deputy Attorney General and Assistant Attorney General of the Office of Legal Counsel under the Bush administration, was a member of the Domestic Policy Staff under President Reagan, served in the Central Intelligence Agency, and was a law clerk for Judge Malcolm Wilkie of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. In addition to his significant public service, he also has extensive experience practicing law in the private sector. Attorney General Barr received his A.B. and M.A. from Columbia University and a J.D. from George Washington University School of Law. We welcome the Attorney General and we thank him for participating today. Now, if you would please rise, I will begin by swearing you in. Would you raise your right hand, please? Or left hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record show the witness has answered in the affirmative. Thank you, and please be seated. Please note that your written statement will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, I ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. To help you stay within that time, there is a timing light on your table. When the light switches from green to yellow, you have 1 minute to conclude your testimony. When the light turns red, it signals your 5 minutes have expired. Mr. Barr, you may begin.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Jordan. I'm pleased to be here this morning. On behalf of the Department of Justice, I want to pay my respects to your colleague, Congressman John Lewis, an indomitable champion of civil rights and the rule of law. I think it is especially important to remember today that he pursued his cause passionately and successfully with unwavering commitment to nonviolence. As I said in my confirmation hearing, the Attorney General has a unique obligation. He holds in trust the fair and impartial administration of justice. He must ensure that there is one standard of justice that applies to everyone equally, and that criminal cases are handled even-handedly based on the law and the facts and without regard to political or personal considerations. And I can tell you that I've handled criminal matters that have come to me for decision in this way. The president has not attempted to interfere in these decisions. On the contrary, he has told me from the start that he expects me to exercise my independent judgment to make whatever call I think is right, and that is precisely what I've done. Indeed, it's precisely because I feel complete freedom to do what I think is right that induced me to serve once again as Attorney General. As you just said, Mr. Chairman, I served as Attorney General under President George H.W. Bush, and after that I spent many years in the corporate world. I'm almost 70 years old. I was almost 70 years old and slipping happily into retirement. I had nothing to prove and I had no desire to return to government. I had no prior relationship with President Trump. Let me turn briefly to the several pressing issues of the day. The horrible killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis understandably jarred the whole country and forced us to reflect on longstanding issues in the nation. Those issues obviously relate to the relationship between law enforcement and the African American community. Given our history, it's understandable that among Black Americans there's be some ambivalence and often distrust toward the police. Until just last 50 years ago or so, our laws and our institutions were explicitly racist, explicitly discriminatory. It was not until the 60s that the civil rights movement finally succeeded in tearing down the Jim Crow edifice. Our laws finally came to formally embody the guarantee of equal protection. And since then, the work of securing civil rights has rightly focused on reforming institutions to ensure they better conform to our laws and to our aspirations. That work, it's important to acknowledge, has been increasingly successful. Police forces today are far more diverse than they've ever been. And there are both more Black police chiefs and more Black officers in the ranks. Although the death of George Floyd at the hands of the police was a shocking event, the fact is that these events are fortunately quite rare. According to statistics compiled by the Washington Post, the number of unarmed Black men killed by police so far this year is 8. The number of unarmed white men killed by police over the same period of time is 11. And the overall numbers of police shootings have been decreasing. Nevertheless, every instance of excessive force is unacceptable and must be addressed appropriately through legal process, as is happening now in Minneapolis. But apart from the numbers, I think these events strike a deep chord in the Black community. Deeper, lingering concern that in encounters with police, Blacks will not be treated even-handedly. They will not be given the benefit of the doubt. They will be treated with greater suspicion. Senator Tim Scott has recounted the numerous times he's been unjustifiably pulled over on Capitol Hill. And as one prominent Black professional in Washington said to me, African Americans often feel treated as suspects first and citizens second. And I think these concerns are legitimate. At the same time, I think it would be an oversimplification to treat the problem as rooted in some deep-seated racism generally infecting our police departments. It seems far more likely that the problem stems from a complex mix of factors which can be addressed with focused attention over time. And we in law enforcement must be conscious of the concerns and ensure that we do not have two systems of justice. Fortunately, some have chosen to respond to George Floyd's death in a far less productive way by demonizing the police, promoting slogans like "all cops are bastard," and making grossly irresponsible proposals to defund the police. The demonization of the police is not only unfair and inconsistent with principles of all people should be treated as individuals, but gravely injurious to the inner city communities. When communities turn on and pillory the police, officers naturally become more risk averse and crime rates soar. Unfortunately, we are seeing that now in many of our cities. The threat to Black lives posed by crime on the streets is massively greater than any threat posed by police misconduct. The leading cause of death for young Black males is homicide. Every year, approximately 7,500 Black Americans are victims of homicide. The vast majority of them, around 90%, are killed by other Blacks, mainly by gunfire. Each of those lives matter. It is for this reason that in selected cities where there has been an upsurge in violent crime, we are stepping up and bolstering the activities of our joint anti-crime task forces. Finally, I want to address a different breakdown in the rule of law that we've witnessed over the past 2 months. In the wake of George Floyd's death, violent rioters and anarchists have hijacked legitimate protests to wreak senseless havoc and destruction on innocent victims. The current situation in Portland is a telling example. Every night for the past 2 months, a mob of hundreds of rioters have laid siege to the federal courthouse and other nearby federal property. The rioters have come equipped for fight, armed with powerful slingshots, tasers, sledgehammers, saws, knives, rifles, and explosive devices. Inside the courthouse are a relatively small number of federal law enforcement personnel charged with a defensive mission to protect the courthouse. What unfolds nightly around the courthouse cannot reasonably be called protest. It is, by any objective measure, an assault on the government of the United States. As elected officials of the federal government, every member of this committee, regardless of your political views or your feelings about the Trump administration, should condemn violence against federal officers and the destruction of federal property. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate your listing for me the areas of concern in your opening statement, and I'm looking forward to addressing them all.
Thank you for your testimony. We will now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions, and I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. On July 22nd, you joined the president as he announced the expansion of Operation Legend, an initiative. Let me start that again. On July 22nd, you joined the president as he announced the expansion of Operation Legend, an initiative to combat violent crime in Kansas City, with approximately $61 million in DOJ grants. I am confused, however, as to the purpose of launching Operation Legend at this moment in time. In December of last year, you announced that the department would divert over $70 million in grants to 7 U.S. cities under an initiative called Operation Relentless Pursuit, correct?
That's right.
And Operation Relentless Pursuit targeted a familiar list of cities, places like Albuquerque, Baltimore, and Kansas City, correct?
Correct.
At the same July 22nd press conference, you initially claimed that over 200 arrests had been made under Operation Legend, correct?
Correct.
But you misspoke.
Correct.
The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District of Missouri later confirmed that only a single arrest had been made under the auspices of Operation Legend, correct?
I don't know.
And the 199 other arrests were made under Relentless Pursuit or other programs. Well, that was correct. I think you could be forgiven for being confused. Operation Legend appears to be little more than a repackaging of existing operations in these cities. So why all the drama? Why join the president at the White House to announce a bold new operation that appears to be neither bold nor new? Understandably, Americans are very suspicious of your motives here. There are those who believe you are sending federal law enforcement into these cities not to combat violent crime, but to help with the president's re-election efforts. The president has made clear that he wants conflict between protesters and police to be a central theme of his campaign. So let me ask you directly, Mr. Barr. Yes or no? Yes or no? Did you rebrand existing projects under the Legend in order to assist the president in an election year?
I wouldn't call it. I wouldn't.
Attorney General, would you agree with me, at least on principle, that it is improper for the Department of Justice to divert resources and law enforcement personnel in an effort to assist the president's re-election campaign?
No, Mr. Chairman, in the fall, we did inaugurate an anti-crime initiative because we were concerned about increasing violent crime in a number of cities. And we call that Relentless Pursuit. Unfortunately, COVID intervened, and our agents who were detailed for these assignments could not perform the operation. So the operation was squelched by COVID. So we couldn't complete or make much progress on relentless pursuit. However, in the intervening time, we saw violent crime continuing to rise, and a lot of that was triggered by the events after the death of George Floyd. So we did reboot the program after COVID started breaking and we could commit the law enforcement resources to actually accomplish the mission, which is to reduce violent crime. Now, I regret that COVID interrupted our law enforcement activities, but it doesn't obviate the fact that there is serious violent crime in these cities. These police and mayors have been asking us for help, and we have put in additional federal agents and investigators to help deal with it.
Have you, now, yes or no, have you discussed the president's reelection campaign with the president or with any White House official or any surrogate of the president?
Well, I'm not going to get into my discussions with the president.
Well, have you discussed that topic with him, yes or no?
Not in relation to this program.
I didn't ask that. I asked if you discussed that with...
I'm a member of the cabinet and there's an election going on. Obviously, the topic
So the
comes
answer
up.
is yes.
Well,
The answer
the
is
topic comes up in cabinet meetings and other things.
Okay.
It shouldn't
And
be a
as part of-
surprise that the topic of the election.
I didn't say I was surprised. I just asked if you'd done that. So as part of those conversations with the president or his people about the reelection campaign, have you ever discussed the current or future deployment of federal law enforcement?
In connection with what?
In connection with what you just said, in connection with your discussions with the president or with other people around him of his reelection campaign, have you discussed the current or future deployment of federal law
Well,
enforcement?
as I say, I'm not going to get into my discussions with the president, but I've made it clear that I would like to pick the cities based on law enforcement need and based on neutral
So,
criteria.
but you can't tell me whether you discussed.
No, I'm not going to discuss what I discussed with the
Can
president.
you commit today that the department will not use federal law enforcement as a prop in the president's reelection campaign?
We are not
I just
using
want to
federal law
close
enforcement.
with this thought. You really can't hide behind legal fictions this time, Mr. Barr. It's all out in the open, where the people can see what you are doing for themselves. The president wants footage for his campaign ads, and you appear to be serving it up to him as ordered. In most of these cities, the protests had begun to wind down before you marched in and confronted the protesters. And the protesters aren't mobs. They are mothers and veterans and mayors. In this moment, real leadership would entail de-escalation, collaboration, and looking for ways to peaceably resolve our differences. Instead, you use pepper spray and truncheons on American citizens. You did it here in Washington. You did it at Lafayette Square. You expanded to Portland. And now you are projecting fear and violence nationwide in pursuit of obvious political objectives. Shame on you, Mr. Barr.
Can I just say, Mr.
Shame on you.
Can I just
My
say,
time
Mr.
has expired. For what purpose does Mr. Jordan seek recognition? Mr. Excuse me.
Could I just
What
have a
purpose
moment?
does Mr. My time has expired. For what purpose does Mr. Johnson seek recognition?
Questions for the witness, and I will yield the floor to him to respond.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, you've conflated two different things. The effort, like legend, is to deal with violent crime that's committing on the streets of the city. Again, predatory violence like murder, shootings, which are soaring in some cities right now. That does not involve encountering protesters, as you refer to it. Civil disturbance is a different set of issues. And I just reject the idea that the department has flooded anywhere and attempted to suppress demonstrators. We make a clear distinction between demonstrators.
Facts speak for
Well,
themselves.
This is my time,
I'm
Mr. Chairman.
answering, and you know, the fact of the matter is, if you take Portland, the courthouse is under attack. The federal resources are inside the perimeter around the courthouse, defending it from almost 2 months of daily attacks where people march to the court, try to gain entrance, and have set fires, thrown things, used explosives, and injured police, including just this past weekend, perhaps permanently blinding 3 federal officers with lasers. We are on the defense. We're not out looking for trouble. And if the state and the city would provide the law enforcement services that other jurisdictions do, we would have no need to have additional marshals in the courthouse.
On behalf of hundreds of millions of Americans, thank you for that clarification, and thank you for being here. And thank you for your service today and your willingness to do this in very challenging times. Mr. Attorney General, we're very appreciative. It's not an easy job. It's a vitally important one. I so appreciated what you said in your opening statement today, which is what you said in your confirmation hearing. The Attorney General has a unique obligation. He holds in trust the fair and impartial administration of justice. We appreciate that so much. The Democrats have asserted here this morning, and they continue to say in the media, that under your leadership, the Justice Department has become highly politicized. Why is that a totally unfounded allegation?
Because actually what I've been trying to do is restore the rule of law. And the rule of law is, at essence, that we have one rule for everybody. If you apply one rule to A, the same rule applies to B. And I felt we didn't have that previously at the department. We had strayed. And I would just ask people, I'm supposedly punishing the president's enemies and helping his friends. What enemies have I indicted? Who could you point to one indictment that has been under the department that you feel is unmerited, that you feel violates the rule of law? One indictment. Now, you say I helped the president's friends. The cases that are cited, the Stone case and the Flynn case, are both cases where I determined that some intervention was necessary to rectify the rule of law, to make sure people are treated the same. I said Stone was prosecuted under me, and I said all along I thought that was a righteous prosecution. I thought he should go to jail, and I thought the judge's sentence was correct. But the lying prosecutors were trying to advocate for a sentence that was more than twice anyone else in a similar position had ever served. And this is a 67-year-old man, first-time offender, no violence, and they were trying to put him in jail for 7 to 9 years. And I wasn't going to advocate that, because that is not the rule of law. I agree the president's friends don't deserve special breaks, but they also don't deserve to be treated more harshly than other people. And sometimes that's a difficult decision to make, especially when you know you're going to be castigated for it. But that is what the rule of law is, and that's what fairness to the individual ultimately comes to, being willing to do what's fair to the individual.
Amen, and thank you for that. And by contrast, what the previous DOJ did under the previous administration was politicize law enforcement. The Obama-Biden administration sabotaged the Trump transition. They illegally spied on the Trump campaign. They unmasked members of the Trump campaign. They employed aggressive tactics on their campaign officials. Senior FBI officials, we all know on this committee, carried over from the Obama administration, carried on their abuses into the Trump administration and into the whole impeachment scam and all the rest. Let me ask you just one question because my time is running out. President Obama's Attorney General Eric Holder famously referred to himself as President Obama's wingman. He said in an interview, quote, "I'm still enjoying what I'm doing. There's still work to be done. I'm still the president's wingman, so I'm there with my boy." That's what he said famously. Is it the duty of the Attorney General to be the president's wingman?
No, I've already described what I think the duty of the Attorney General is.
And in your office, you are then free to act independently of the president. Isn't that true?
That is true, particularly on criminal cases. It's required.
And that's exactly what he has asked you to do. Isn't that right?
Yes.
I have no further time. I yield back. Thank you.
It's well you have no further questions. Your time has expired. Ms. Lofgren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Attorney General, it's obvious what is happening here from the video played during the ranking member's opening remarks. It's clear that the president's playbook is to divert attention from his catastrophic failure in dealing with the COVID-19 situation. In Canada, our neighbor to the north, in Europe, the virus has been reduced to such a level that people can safely go out and not worry about being infected. But here in the United States, millions of Americans have been infected. Tens of thousands are dying, and the president needs to divert from that failure. And what is the playbook? The playbook is to create the impression that there is violence, that he must send in federal troops, and that the American people should be afraid of other Americans and trust the president because he's going to send in all troops to American cities, and that's how he hopes to win the election. You know, it's one thing to fight crime with joint task forces. That involves the cooperation of state and local officials. But the governor of Oregon and the mayor of Portland has asked that the federal troops leave because the reaction has actually been in reverse proportion. People are showing up because the troops are there. And I'd like to say that so many of them, I would say most of them, are nonviolent. We've all heard about the wall of moms who show up to make sure that people are safe. And here's what they say. They say they've been tear gassed night after night, left vomiting, that they've been shot at with rubber bean bags, pepper spray. So this brutality has created even more demonstrators. I'd just like to ask you this. When the president issued his executive order, they indicated your department should prioritize investigations. Has your department started any investigations pursuant to the executive order that the president issued?
Which executive order, Congresswoman?
The executive order that asks for the deployment of troops to protect the monuments and the federal facilities.
Yes,
On June 26th.
yeah, I wouldn't say it was troops, but we have initiated investigations. Yes, we've made arrests of people who have been rioting and taken down statues. But I think your characterization of Portland is completely false.
I would like to, we can get into that, but I'd like to ask you a question about surveillance, if I may. We've heard reports that cell site stimulators known as stingrays or dirt boxes are being used to collect phone call location and even content of phone calls. Drones are being used that may have face recognition or cell phone interception technology, and that there is bulk collection of internet browsing history. What specific authority is the department using for these surveillance tools?
I really can't speak to those instances if they in fact occurred. I'm glad to go and try to determine what you're talking about.
Well, actually, I'm asking about authority, not the details.
Well, I think most of our cyber activities are conducted by the FBI under their law enforcement powers to detect and prevent crime, federal crime.
I think the American public should know that this surveillance technique isn't just about the people in front of the courthouse. If a husband and wife call each other and one of the spouses has a cell phone that's within range of one of these technologies, not only the location, the actual content of that couple's conversation can be scooped up using this technology. So this really isn't just about the demonstrating. This is about the privacy of all Americans, and it's all being violated for the president's political purposes of trying to create a scene, create a reason, divert attention from the COVID failure. I think it's really very unfortunate and a disservice to the American people. Mr. Chairman, my time has expired. So
Point of order.
The gentlelady yields back.
Mr. Chairman, point of order, real quick.
Gentleman will state his point of order.
Could you ask those members who choose not to come to work to silence their cell phones on the video because it's distracting to what we're doing here today?
That is not a point of order. I now recognize Mr. Chabot.
Mr. Attorney General, would it be accurate to say that it's this administration's responsibility, and of course you're part of the administration, to see that federal laws are upheld and that the federal property is secure and safe and protected? Is that correct?
That's right, Congressman. They're sort of distinct missions. One mission is to enforce federal law. And by the way, the federal government is the sovereign of the United States. We have two sovereigns here in the United States, and we enforce the federal law all over the country. Every square foot of the country we enforce federal law. The other is protecting federal property, and specifically U.S. courthouses, which are the heart of federal property in all 93 jurisdictions in the United States. And we have the obligation to protect federal courts, and the U.S. Marshals specifically have been given that obligation. Federal courts are under attack. Since when is it okay to try to burn down a federal court? If someone went down the street to the Prettyman Court here, that beautiful courthouse we have right at the bottom of the hill, and started breaking windows and firing industrial-grade fireworks in to start a fire, throw kerosene balloons in and start fires in the court, is that okay? Is that okay now? No, the U.S. Marshals have a duty to stop that and defend the courthouse, and that's what we are doing in Portland. We are at the courthouse defending the courthouse. We're not out looking for trouble.
Thank you, General. And as far as weapons and devices that were utilized by the group of people, and you mentioned trying to destroy the courthouse. I mean, they were literally trying to burn it down, and apparently didn't give a hoot about the people that were occupied in the building as well. So people were in danger.
That is absolutely right.
So as far as the weapons that you mentioned, let me get this straight. My understanding is that the people attacking the building had, among other things, rifles, explosives, knives, saws, sledgehammers, tasers, slingshots, rocks, bricks, lasers. Have I missed anything, or does that about cover it?
You have missed some things, but that's a good list.
Well,
But they have these powerful slingshots with ball bearings that they shoot. They've used pellet guns. We believe we have found those projectiles have penetrated marshals to the bone, and they use the lasers to blind the marshals. They do start fires. They start fires if they can get the fire inside or through the windows, and they start fires along the outside of the courthouse. When the marshals come out to try to deal with the fire, they're assaulted.
General, if local elected officials, mayors and city councils and governors did their jobs and kept the peace, would it even be necessary for federal law enforcement personnel to be there in the first place?
No, and that's exactly the point. Look around the country. Even where there are these kinds of riots occurring, we haven't had to put in the kind of reinforcements that we have in Portland, because the state and local law enforcement does their job and won't allow rioters to come and just physically assault the courthouse. In Portland, that's not the case.
General, some have derisively referred to these law enforcement personnel as stormtroopers and worse. Does that accurately describe them? Or would you like to set the record straight?
No, they're obviously not stormtroopers. Normally we would have a group of deputy marshals in a court that would be, in business suits and ties or regular civilian dress. Those would be the deputy marshals as the protective force for the court. But after almost a month of rioting in Portland, we sent in, I think it was around the 4th of July timeframe, we sent in about 20 special operations marshals. And those are tactical teams that are able, are padded and protected so they could deal with this kind of thing. Up until last week, I was told we had our stormtrooper from the Department of Justice amounted to 29 marshals in the courthouse. 29 marshals. As of until recently increased, I think there were 95, I was told, 95 DHS, Federal Protective Service and other DHS officers trying to protect the courthouse and 3 other buildings. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to protect federal functions and federal buildings, which are a very small part of the city, but the rioters go at them, and we have gradually increased our numbers there to try to protect those facilities. If the state would come in and keep peace on the streets in front of the courthouse, we wouldn't need additional people at the courthouse.
Thank you, General. My time's expired.
Gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Jackson-Lee.
Mr. Chairman, before I begin, I'd like to submit into the record a picture of Lewis and Clark History Department chair of shot at protests in Portland. Ask unanimous consent. Place that into the record. John Lewis in 1963 said, "We are tired about being beat by police. We're tired of being put in jail. We want our freedom now." Mr. Attorney General, in your remarks, you indicated that we've made great progress since that time, and you indicated that the killing of George Floyd was shocking. I disagree. It was outright cold-blooded murder on the streets of America, unfortunately by police misconduct. You seem to have a difficult time understanding systemic racism and institutional racism that has plagued so many. Mr. Attorney General, do you understand a Black mother's or parent's talk to their child, to their son? Do you know what that is?
I think I do.
I don't know if you do, but Trayvon Martin, Ahmaud Arbery, Tamir Rice, Michael Brown, Sean Bell, and George Floyd. Black mothers and fathers have had to talk to their sons about police violence. I take no backseat to the history of this committee that has stood for good policing, not misconduct. And so I ask you this question: does the Trump Justice Department seek to end systemic racism and racism in law enforcement? I just need a yes or no answer.
To the extent there is racism in any of our institutions in this country and the police, then obviously this administration will fully enforce this.
So you agree that there may be systemic
I said to
racism?
the extent, in where?
Let me continue my line of
I
questioning.
don't agree that there's systemic racism in police departments.
Specifically,
Generally in this country.
I'm reclaiming my time, Mr. General. Specifically, do you understand the violent impact of racial profiling? And do you support the end racial profiling, racial and religious profiling in the George Floyd bill, including the removal of the strict interpretation of qualified immunity, which would leave individuals like Breonna Taylor and George Floyd without any relief at all?
No, I'm opposed to eliminating qualified immunity, and I don't agree that it would leave the victims of police misconduct
Well, let me share with you some aspects.
without any remedy at all.
I'm reclaiming my time. Let me share with you some aspects of profiling. After the death of George Floyd found that while Black people make up 19% of the Minneapolis population and 9% of its police, they were on the receiving end of 58% of the city's police use of force incidents. In addition, we've seen that Black men are twice as likely to be stopped and searched. Hispanic drivers, 65% to receive a ticket, and Native Americans in Arizona, 3 times more likely to search and be stopped. Let me ask you the questions of how we respond to that. The Justice Department has many tools at its disposal to reduce police violence, to pattern or practice investigations, a practice to end bad policing and police violence. It addresses police violence at an institution level rather than just focuses on acute cases. If you understand that, then why has your department only pursued one pattern or practice investigation since President Trump took office that could stop systemic racism?
If you read my statement or listened to my statement, I did specifically acknowledge that there was a difficulty in this country with the African American community.
Mr. Attorney General, I have short time.
Well,
Can you just
I'd
tell
like
me
to be
why
able
you
to
have not
answer the
done a
question.
pattern in practice? What was the reason?
And you asked me what I thought the response was, and I thought the response to this is, in fact, training of police. And I think the police believe that that's a response. I was talking to a Black
Then let me
chief of
continue.
police who-
Mr. Attorney General, I want to respect you, but I have a short time. For example, 18 U.S.C. Section 242, which makes unlawful the denial of rights under the color of law. Can you defend the fact that in the first 7 months of FY 2020, federal prosecutors filed only 242 charges in just 27 cases in the Trump DOJ? And were you aware that in FY 2019, federal prosecutors brought 2 Section 242 charges in just 49 cases in the United States? And are you aware of how many cases we've had? 184,274, which means that in FY 2019, only about 27 out of every 100,000 prosecutions was related to Section 242 charges. Do you have a reason for that?
Yes, I do. I will get you the numbers on it. I don't know them off the top of my head, but actually our criminal prosecutions under 241 and 242 are extremely strong and are comparable to, if not exceed, prior administrations. But at the beginning of this year, most of the very few jurisdictions had grand juries that were open. No grand jury.
I think the reason is because it was really skinny. It was not your focus. Your focus was more to let out friends like Roger Stone and Paul Manafort, while Tamir Rice, whose case has not been taken up, was playing with a toy gun, was killed by police at the age of 12. Breonna Taylor was sleeping in her apartment when she was killed by police at age 26. And Rashad Brooks, 27, was killed just for sleeping in his car in a Wendy's parking lot. And George Floyd from Houston, Texas, known as a humble man, was murdered in the streets of Minneapolis crying, "I can't breathe." I would hope that the DOJ would focus on systemic institutional racism because there is good policing. That's what we're trying to do in the Justice and the Judiciary Committee, and that's what we need you to join us on, Mr. Attorney General, and to recognize that institutional racism does exist, and until we accept that, we will not finish our job and reach the goals and aspirations of our late iconic John Lewis. With that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Mr. Gomer.
Attorney General Barr, we've been hearing about these peaceful protests in major cities around the country, controlled by Democratic mayors and city councils. You've had a lot of experience. Have you ever seen so many people hurt, injured, and killed at peaceful protests in your life?
I haven't seen it. No, not at a peaceful protest. Obviously, as I've said from the beginning, these peaceful protests in many places are being hijacked by a very hardcore of instigators, violent instigators. And they become violent, and their primary direction of violence is to injure police. Police casualties far exceed anything on the civilian side.
Weren't there over 50 police injured in Chicago just in recent days? And now I'm hearing this allegation that this administration is helping spread coronavirus, COVID-19. And yet these are some of the same people that just castigated the president for shutting down travel from the location where the virus was coming from. And now some seem more interested in defending the Chinese Communist Party than they are our own country. But what occurred to me, hearing this allegation about this administration helping spread COVID, would it be a good idea then, perhaps, if that's the big concern here, that maybe the federal government should shut down the protests during this COVID-19 spread so that we can satisfy our colleagues that you're doing more to stop it? Has that ever been a consideration?
No, I've never considered that.
Well, it would apparently stop some of the allegations being thrown here. Now, I know you know history. Going back to 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution, the Mao Revolution, some of these tactics we're seeing are not new. Trying to get, even David Horowitz, I introduced one time as a former socialist. He said, no, I was a full-blown communist. But he has pointed out that he started looking away from the group he was in because he saw they were interested in trying to provoke the police to kill somebody so that they could really create mayhem. You're familiar with that tactic by Marxists, are you not?
Yes.
It is a dangerous time. Well, let me ask you, I know you know that U.S. attorneys are supposed to serve at the pleasure of the president. You know, Bill Clinton fired 93 U.S. attorneys on the same day. Do you know what made U.S. Attorney Berman think that he was the exception who did not serve at the pleasure of the president? What caused him to think he owned that position?
I think part of it was he seems to have had the view that because he was court appointed, and there is a provision in law for court appointment of a U.S. attorney as essentially a placeholder until the administration gets somebody, that he felt he could not be removed by the president because he was court appointed, and that's not correct.
Yeah, and some judges fail to know what my constitutional law professor knew, and that is that all courts except federal courts, except for one, owe their existence and continuation and jurisdiction to the U.S. Congress. Hopefully, Mr. Berman will figure that out at some point. Now, is Bruce Orr still working for the FBI?
He works for the Department of Justice.
Well, we have heard so much information about he's basically being the go-between between the DNC, the Clinton campaign, Fusion GPS, Christopher Steele, the Russian propaganda that were incorporated into his dossier. And I know Kleinsmith, Christopher Wray, indicated he had been given the chance to resign, go get a better job. I'm wondering how long Bruce Orr is going to be staying where he is. It's incredible to me that he's still there.
Well, I can't talk about, individual personnel matters.
Well, thank you for your service. I'm sorry for the abuse you've taken when you're just trying to do your job. Appreciate it very much. You're back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Barr, I'm the chairman of the subcommittee on the Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties, so this is most pertinent hearing to me. Firstly, I'd like to ask you if you will work with us and allow the head of the Civil Rights Division, Assistant Attorney General Eric Dryband, to testify before this committee this fall.
I'll talk to him about it.
Will you encourage him?
I'll talk to him about it.
All right. I've closely watched actions taken by the federal government in Lafayette Park in June and currently in Portland, Oregon. According to a DOJ document dated June 4, received by this committee, 1,500 federal agents from 10 different agencies were deployed to confront protesters in Washington, D.C. At Lafayette Park, which has long been honored and accepted as a place of protest in our nation's capital, on the first day of June, the world watched in horror on live television as federal agents deployed by the administration and with you present and telling him to get it done, used force to clear Lafayette Park so that the president, with you and others at your side, could walk across the park and have a photo op in front of St. John's Church. This was anathema to the bishop of the diocese and the rector of the church. It was also an affront to the Constitution and to the American people. Given the timing and the coordinated attack against the peaceful demonstrators, it strains credulity that this was not planned for use of political purposes. And just yesterday, Major DeMarco testified to another committee of Congress that the protesters were peaceful, and that's what the majority of people have said, and the response was excessive. When did you first learn that the president planned to walk through the park and go to St. John's Church?
First, I'd like to respond to what you...
Would you please answer my question? My time is limited.
I learned sometime in the afternoon that the president might come out of the White House, and then later in the afternoon, I heard that he might go over to the church.
So it was absolutely necessary the park be cleared for his walk.
No, that had nothing to do with that. The plan to move...
Mr. Attorney General, it was necessary that the park be cleared, and it was done, and you said, get it done. Well, I have the time. Thank you. In Portland, we've seen mothers and we've seen veterans who were peacefully protesting, not threatening the federal courthouse, beaten and gassed. Unidentified armed federal agents violently attacked demonstrators in a violation of the First Amendment's freedom of assembly and arrested citizens without individualized suspicion in a violation of the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures and a warrant requirement. You've gone through the Fifth Amendment and due process and just negated it. And the 10th Amendment, which leaves general policing to the law enforcement, to the states, has been forgotten. Maybe what happened was your secret police were poorly trained, just like your Bureau of Prisons guards were poorly trained and allowed the most notorious inmate in our nation's last several years, Jeffrey Epstein, to conveniently commit suicide. Sad. You misled Congress and the American people about Special Counsel Mueller's findings with your, quote, summary, unquote, of his report. It was issued about a month before you released the redacted portion of the Mueller report. But you set the stage. You set the stage such that the Special Counsel objected to the accuracy of how it was reported by the press and what you said. And federal judge Reggie Walton, appointed by George W. Bush, declared in a ruling that your summary was, quote, distorted, unquote, and misleading, unquote.
and that the court could not trust you. Further, Judge Walton stated your report was, quote, a calculated attempt to influence public disclosure about the Mueller report in favor of President Trump, unquote. This committee still does not have the unredacted Mueller report. America has still not seen the unredacted Mueller report. Your excuses for not releasing it because it had to do with ongoing cases no longer exist because those ongoing cases have been completed or commuted or finished. Other attorney generals work with this Judiciary Committee to see that the American public and that the Judiciary Committee had unredacted copies of that report. You have not. You've gone to court to stall it. This report needs to be given to this committee. In Michael Cohen, you've treated him differently than Michael Flynn and Roger Stone. In Michael Flynn, you've attempted to dismiss the charges, even after he twice pled guilty. And in Roger Stone, you went further. Mr. Barr, John Lewis said to us, if not me, who? If not now, when? That's why I introduced H.Res. 1032, which would require this committee to investigate your conduct as Attorney General and determine whether you should be impeached. That is my constitutional duty. I yield back the balance of my time.
May I respond to these?
I seek recognition.
I'm sorry, what did you?
I would
the
like to
chair
I would like to
recognizes
seek
Mr. Cohen.
recognition for unanimous consent requests.
Yes. You are
Thank you.
recognized.
I'd like to introduce for the record a Slate article entitled Why Trump Chose Portland, which describes the racial history of the state and the Portland Police Bureau. I'd also like to introduce an op-ed from Mary McCord, who writes her words were twisted to justify the department's disingenuous position to drop charges against Michael Flynn after he had already pled guilty. I'd like to introduce an op-ed from Jonathan Kravis, describing the political interference in the Roger Stone case and why he resigned from the Department of Justice. And I'd like to introduce a statement from over 2,600 former DOJ officials calling for Attorney General Barr's resignation because of his assault on the rule of law, and a letter from the New York City Bar urging Congress to commence formal inquiries into a pattern of conduct by Attorney General Barr that threatens public confidence in the fair and impartial administration of justice. And finally, a letter from 27 of the District of Columbia's most prominent attorneys and law professors, including 4 past presidents of the D.C. Bar, calling for an ethics investigation into Mr. Barr's conduct. And
With that
last but not
objection.
least, a letter from over 80% of the George Washington University Law School faculty, your alma mater, saying his actions have posed and continue to create a clear and present danger to the even-handed administration of justice, to civil liberties, and the constitutional order.
Okay, without objection.
Madam Chair, one more
The-
unanimous consent request on this
Go
side.
ahead.
This is the article that says Representative Jerry Natler says Antifa violence in Portland is a myth. That's from Politico and a number of other journals. We'll put that
Without
in the record.
objection.
Thank
Mr. Collins is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, Attorney General Barr. Wow. I'm beginning to believe, frankly, that you're probably that just hadn't come out yet, probably will in a little bit. You're probably the cause of the common cold and, and possibly even the COVID-19. I'm not sure at this point because everything's being thrown at you, including now, undoubtedly, your alma mater doesn't like you anymore. Where have we come? The chairman said something earlier today that really made me think. He said, why all the drama? That's the most ironic statement coming from this committee in the last 18 months that I've ever heard of, the drama that we're bringing up today. We're seeming to just contort ourselves to get to some way to show that you have a nefarious motive. I believe, like some of our side here, I believe the biggest problem you have is telling the truth. I believe that's the problem that they have with you. You'll tell the truth and you'll take responsibility for your actions. And I think that's why you're being attacked. But I want to continue just on this, quote, peaceful protest for a second. You made a comment just a second ago on these rights. Talking about the courthouses just down the street, what if they decided, do you think that this body right here would rise up if they decided to go tonight and paint the Capitol building?
This body, I'm not sure.
I think this side would. I'm not sure. Yeah, this side, other side, I'm not so sure. It may be the peaceful protest to burn down the Capitol. Maybe we're back to 1812 again. But also, the other question I have is, and you've heard it earlier today, the stormtrooper comments by the Speaker of the House. And we know that that is a direct reference to the paramilitary wing of the Nazi Party, stormtroopers going at it. Do you believe that that actually puts our law enforcement community at a whole? As a son of a state trooper, I want to know your opinion. Don't you think it encourages the violence that we're seeing and encourages the participation against the police?
I think that's possible, and I think it's irresponsible to call these federal law enforcement officers stormtroopers.
Yeah, and we're seeing that thing played out over and over. Let's switch back to something else, though, that is I think more appealing here. We've talked about the investigations, and especially going with Flynn. Do you believe that there was actually a basis to go after General Flynn I mean, what we've seen so far, what's been released, and especially keeping an investigation open, Peter Strzok kept it open. Do you believe there's actually a basis for the beginning of this investigation to start with, or continuing it?
Well, I would just say I asked another U.S. attorney in St. Louis who had 10 years in the FBI and 10 years in the Department of Justice as a career prosecutor to take a look at it. And he determined, based on documents that had not been provided to Flynn's side and not been provided to the court, that in fact there was no basis to investigate Flynn. And furthermore, it was clearly established by the documents that the FBI agents who interviewed him did not believe that he thought he was lying.
Well, there's another part of this as well that concerns what has been, given to the courts and in the interviews, and that is that the facts were not disclosed to Flynn prior to the interview. That seems like a Brady violation to me. Do you believe that there's a Brady violation there in this case?
No, there wasn't a Brady violation there, but I think what the counsel concluded was that the only purpose of the interview, the only purpose, was to try to catch him in saying something that they could then say was a lie.
So it was an entrapment.
And therefore there was not a legit, the interview was untethered to any legitimate investigation.
So as the law enforcement officer in this country, it is your responsibility to provide justice for both sides, not, and just call it as it should be. And I think that's what you've done there. Continuing on Durham case, and I know we're not talking specifically about the Durham investigation, which we're hopeful of, but to your knowledge, and we're seeing some released documents on the last week or two that have said, to your knowledge, has Kevin Kleinsmith or anyone else at FBI or DOJ who was previously there, attempted to redeem themselves by cooperating with the investigation? It's been slow, and I
can't get into that.
Okay, I understand that. I have another issue as we finish up in looking at this between the rhetoric, between the investigation. I think Durham investigation is something most of us are waited for, because we can't seem to get this committee to actually believe that the IG's report is worth having something about this committee. And there's not a Democrat or Republican on the side that can make a legitimate claim why the Inspector General has not been called before this committee to actually explain his report, except politics. And that's what this committee has become all along. But I have another problem, and I've written to you about this, and that's down with the district attorney down in Fulton County, Georgia, actually majoring felony murder charges on an officer. And the interesting part about this is what we do as prosecutors do. But were you aware that the district attorney failed to seek an indictment from a grand jury, or even waited for a GBI investigation to finish before bringing those charges? Were you aware of that?
Yes, I was.
Okay. As an attorney, and again, looking at this with the environment we have right now, with police officers constantly under attack from this committee and from others in all over the country, and especially from the Speaker of the House, as an attorney, and especially a prosecutor, do you think it's appropriate to charge a law enforcement officer with a crime as severe as felony murder without giving the investigation more than a mere days, and without obtaining an indictment from the grand jury, and while you announce the charges, lay out a case that is full of falsehoods?
I've said that I would have preferred that he had used the grand jury and had waited till the Georgia Bureau had completed its investigation.
I appreciate your help in that, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you. With that, the chair recognizes Mr. Johnson from Georgia.
Thank you. General Barr, your opening statement reads like it was written by Alex Jones or Roger Stone. Do you stand by that statement?
Yes.
Now, I'm sure that we can agree on some things. We disagree on a whole lot, but I'm sure we can agree on the fact that President Trump is just a prolific tweeter. Isn't that correct?
He seems to be.
And he tweeted many times about the Roger Stone sentencing, didn't he?
I don't know how many times he tweeted about it.
Well, many times. You are aware of them because you said it hurts you from doing your job. And isn't it true that when prosecutors in the Roger Stone case filed a memo with the court recommending a sentence of 7 to 9 years in prison, a few hours later, President Trump tweeted that the sentence recommendation was, quote, a disgrace? You're aware of that?
Yes.
And General Barr, several hours after that, you filed a pleading with the court stating that the sentence recommendation would be changed and that you would be asking for a lighter sentence for Roger Stone. Isn't that correct?
No, what is correct is that, what is correct that on February 10th, Monday, I gave instructions as to what
reclaiming my time.
Yeah, I'm answering your question.
Well, you got to let him answer.
Reclaiming my time, you filed a sentencing recommendation hours after President Trump tweeted his dissatisfaction with the Stone recommendation, and you changed that recommendation.
No, the
several
night
hours after
before,
Trump
the
tweet.
night before, that is
Well,
Monday
I
night.
know your story, but I'm asking.
Well, I'm telling my story. That's what
Well,
I'm
I
here
don't
to
want you
do.
to tell your
Well, I
story. I
do.
want
That's
you to
why I'm
answer my
here.
question.
Well, I'm here to tell my story. And on the night
You're here to
before,
answer my
the
question.
night before, on February 10th,
Sir,
on February
I'm
10th, I
reclaiming-
directed.
Reclaiming my time, sir. Reclaiming my time. And I know you don't want to answer, but the facts are clear. Sentencing recommendation made in the morning, tweet in the afternoon. You changed the sentencing recommendation that.
No, tweet was not made in the
after tweet.
afternoon. The tweet was made at, I think, 1:30 or 2 in the morning.
Well, the tweet was made before and after. Tweeted about that relentlessly, and you've agreed to that. Now, when you filed your sentencing recommendation asking for a lower sentence.
I didn't ask for a lower sentence.
Well, you said that you were going to recommend a lower sentence. And you
No,
wasn't the sentence that was recommended by the line prosecutors according to the sentencing guideline calculations?
It was within the guidelines, but it was not within Justice Department policy, in my view.
General Barr, you're expecting the American people to believe that you did not do what Trump wanted you to do when you changed that sentencing recommendation and lowered it for Roger Stone. You think the American people don't understand that you were carrying out Trump's?
I was not. I had not discussed my sentencing recommendation with anyone at the White House or anyone outside the
President
department.
Wanted you to do, and that's what you did.
No.
Attorney
Let me ask you, do you think it's fair? Do you think it is fair for a 67-year-old man to be sent to prison for 7 to 9 years?
It was in accordance with the sentencing.
No, it was not.
You just said that it was, and your line prosecutors will testify that it was also. Now, I'm going to move on from that.
The department.
During your time as Attorney
It is not the
General for
depart.
Herbert Walker Bush, you never changed the sentencing recommendation for a friend of Herbert Walker Bush, did you?
No, as I recall.
All right, that's all I'm asking. No. And over the course of your time as Trump,
Nothing was never elevated to me.
over the course of your tenure with Trump, you've changed 2 sentencing recommendations, not 1, but 2. Correct?
Which were they?
Yeah, Michael Flynn.
I didn't change it.
Well, you said, you indicated that you changed it because the original Flynn sentencing recommendation was for Flynn to serve 0 to 6 months. But under your authority, the Justice Department supplemented that recommendation with a pleading that stated the Department of Justice's agreement with Flynn's lawyers that probation would be a reasonable sentence and that the DOJ would not be seeking prison time for Michael Flynn. Isn't that correct?
I don't think that's what it said.
Well, that's what it said, sir. You go back and read it.
I think both pleadings
sir,
said that.
Reclaiming my time, prior to you
The
becoming
gentleman's
Madam
time
Chair.
has expired.
Madam Chair, you can give a speech or you can ask questions. If you do the latter, you need to let the witness answer the questions. And that's the chair's obligation,
And I
chair's
believe-
responsibility to allow that to happen.
Mr. Buck is recognized for 5 minutes.
Appearing before the committee today. General Barr, there is a disturbing pattern we've seen throughout history with totalitarian systems of government. The leaders first seek to disarm the population, then they encourage goon squads to suppress opposing voices. And finally, once they have disarmed and silenced the opposition, these authoritarian leaders institute policies that root out and crush freedom in every form. Unfortunately, the American left has been infected with the same totalitarian desire to remove firearms and silence opposing views as part of a campaign to achieve its political ends. We've seen this scenario play out in every major Democrat-run city in America. Progressive leaders push to disarm law-abiding Americans to further their influence while watching as crime rates soar. We even saw failed presidential and Senate candidate Beto O'Rourke proudly tell Americans, hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15 and your AK-47. Now the American left is actively cheering as its fascist militia Antifa rages in the streets.
Antifa is a domestic terrorist organization that hijacks peaceful rallies, organizes armed riots, attacks peaceful protesters, burns buildings, loots stores, and spreads hate. Reports of Antifa-linked attacks began circulating in 2017. These thugs, often armed with sticks and pepper spray and other instruments, showed up to silence college Republican groups at Berkeley. The left was silent. And in June 2019, Antifa jumped into the national conversation after journalist Andy Ngo was brutally attacked in Portland. No arrests were made. The left again was silent. Almost exactly 1 year ago today, the Wall Street Journal ran an op-ed stating Portland has to do something to deter political violence or the city will get more of it. Of course, the city's feckless leadership has only further encouraged Antifa's violent antics. As a result, we've seen 61 straight nights of violence in Portland. Antifa's fascist totalitarian activities are now oozing into other Democrat-run cities. Last Sunday, Antifa launched a violent assault on a peaceful pro-police demonstration in Denver, Colorado. Conservative leaders in Colorado, including Randy Corcoran, a Denver area lawyer and radio talk show host, organized a family-friendly event in honor of Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. The atmosphere was peaceful, and counter-protesters were given plenty of space to advocate their message. But as the afternoon wore on, a swarm of violent Antifa thugs infiltrated peaceful Black Lives Matter counter-protesters and began assaulting pro-police Americans. These are 20 and 30-year-old thugs assaulting 50, 60, 70, and even 80-year-old Americans who only wanted to show their support for law enforcement. What's worse, Denver's cowardly liberal leadership ordered police to retreat once they saw members of Antifa entering the fray. A Denver police detective, Nick Rogers, apologized for this terrible decision. Detective Rogers summed it up best in a recent radio interview, quote, "I'm sorry on behalf of the rank and file. That's not us. That's not who we are. It just kills me that we let good people down." He continued, "I found out that a retreat order was given by the incident commander, and we had one lieutenant step up and say, 'We aren't leaving.' This lieutenant said, 'These people are going to get killed if we don't stay.' So he kept his people there. That's the reason this thing didn't get worse." End of quote. These are sad times in America. Free speech and the right to keep and bear arms are both being threatened by violent anarchists, and the best our chairman can do is call Antifa a myth. General Barr, this has to stop. We can't let Antifa continue terrorizing our country. Can you please tell us about the appropriate use of civil and criminal RICO statutes to address violent criminal groups like Antifa?
In the wake of the beginning of these riots, I asked our joint terrorism task forces, the FBI's joint terrorism task forces, be our principal means of developing evidence and prosecuting violent extremist terrorists who are involved in these activities. And one of the tools, obviously, we would use is RICO, which can be used against an organization. But that doesn't mean that we currently have a RICO case